New France. Between around 1534 and 1803, the French held control of a considerable part of North America. They called this North American colony New France, and it was ruled as a viceroyalty of the French Empire. At its peak in 1712, they held a gigantic portion of the continent, stretching from the port of New Orleans in the southern coast of what is today the United States to the very northeastern tip of Canada in Newfoundland. But despite there being significant French heritage in Canada today, mainly in Quebec, their control and influence over North America was essentially lost. So why? In this video, I want to do two things. First, briefly go over New France and provide some historical context as to how it was created, how it expanded, and how it worked overall. And second, explain how, after it peaked territorially in 1712, it lost more and more territory over the next 70 years, reducing French presence in North America to about a couple of very small islands. If you're only interested in the answer to the question asked in the title and thumbnail, you can skip the historical context through the timestamps. Now, before we keep going, I have to take a minute to thank this week's sponsor who made this video possible, Babbel. Babbel is the #1 learning language platform in the world. Learning French continues to be one of my goals over the past couple of months. I even mentioned it before in these segments, and I'm actually making great progress with Babbel. The other day, I went to this cafe that had a French menu, and I found myself actually understanding what was written there. I also visited Paris a while back and struggled a little, so next time I go there, I want to surprise all the locals by being able to speak it, and maybe I can even join in on one of their protests by chanting along. Because Babbel teaches you languages in a way that you will actually use in your real life. Their classes are designed by real teachers and use a scientifically proven method to teach you to speak a new language in as little as 3 weeks, if you don't skip your lessons. If you also want to try out Babbel and get ready for travel by learning a new language, use the link in the description below and you can enjoy 60% off your membership. They also have a 20-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out. Now, back to the video. French presence in North America dates back to earlier than you may think, and in a different place than you might immediately think of. The first French commissioned exploration of North America was made by Florentine explorer Giovanni de Verrazzano in 1523 with the financing of King Francis I. Like the Portuguese and Spanish before him, he was trying to actually find a sea path to Asia through the west, but ran into a pretty big obstacle along the way called America. He briefly explored the Carolina coasts and then moved up to what is today New York, being the first European to do so and naming it Nouvelle-Angoulême, in honor of the French king, the former Count of Angoulême in France. This successful discovery of land led the king to finance more expeditions and to attempt to establish French colonies in this new continent. And in 1534, Jacques Cartier planted a cross in the Gaspé Peninsula and established the first province of New France, Fort Charlesbourg Royal, present-day Quebec City. There were some setbacks, and only in 1608 did the permanent Quebec City establish itself, but from there they expanded inwards, establishing alliances with the native people. And while friendly relations were established with a lot of the indigenous populations, the French also used those alliances to fight other natives. In fact, war with the Iroquois was important for their expansion. In 1627, the famous Cardinal Richelieu, advisor to King Louis, founded the Company of 100 Associates to invest in New France, as he wanted their North American colonies to be as important as the British ones were. The company was granted a monopoly to manage the fur trade in the colonies of New France, and in return was supposed to settle French Catholics in New France. And speaking of the British, conflicts between them and the French in Canada began as early as 1632, with the British raiding many of the French colonies. This map, made by Samuel de Champlain, shows us the main French domains at around this time, and we can see French presence was limited to the northeastern coast. These old maps are always really cool for me, especially in these small, adorned details like the things they added at sea, the boats, the sea creatures, and the impressive detail on the map coastline and river that they were exploring and settling along. Despite the impressive looking map and the wide reach of French influence, the colony of New France itself was quite small. By 1650, it only had 700 colonists, and because of this, the French crown began paying for passages and offered other incentives to those willing to move to New France. After this, the population grew to about 3,000. Taking more direct control of the colony, local government was reformed along the lines of the government of France, and in 1665, Jean Talon was appointed the first intendant of New France. In this map, we can see it more accurately. It depicts the political map of Northeast North America in 1664. In red are British settlements, in yellow the Dutch, which as we can see still included significant territories here, namely the area of New York, at the time named New Amsterdam. In brown the Iroquois territories, and in blue and purple the French. In the color lines we can see the respective areas of influence. The efforts to boost New France as a colony were at times odd. For instance, since most of the settlers were men, Louis XIV decided to send single women, calling them the king's daughters, and paying for their passages and dowries. Despite being strange, it worked and boosted the colony's population to 6,700 by 1672. At the same time that they encouraged marriages with the natives, the French were always known for having a more tolerant policy towards indigenous populations when compared to other European colonizers. Another fun fact, the 1666 census of New France was the first census conducted in North America. Perhaps feeling like the Northeast territories were more established by then, the French decided they wanted more territory in North America. After all, why not? They had been reasonably successful where they were, and all other European powers were reaching out as well. Therefore, they extended their claims to the south and the west, naming this new territory as La Louisiane after King Louis XIV. In 1682, René Robert Cavelier explored the Ohio River Valley and the Mississippi River Valley, and he claimed the entire territory for France as far south as the Gulf of Mexico. With this, New France would stretch from the Caribbean Sea to the northern Atlantic, splitting the continent in half. Although, despite claiming it, they were yet to actually settle the territory and establish effective control over it. Here something really funny happened. The same explorer attempted to establish the first settlement in 1685 at what he thought was the mouth of the Mississippi River, but his map was wrong, and so he ended up building it in Texas by mistake, outside of the claimed territory. Then most of the settlers died from disease and the survivors were killed in a native attack, so altogether a pretty unsuccessful first attempt. However, they tried again and succeeded, and many French settlements were established in French Louisiana. This map, through the star icons, points out all the major settlements and forts in New France at the time. We can definitely see a larger incidence along rivers and lakes. The claim of Louisiana's territory, which was then the territory sold to the US, which we'll get to soon, was much larger than the one effectively colonized and controlled by the French, as well as the areas under their influence, here in blue. However, despite their internal success, conflicts with the British continued, not only through the colonial skirmishes in America, but also full-on wars in Europe, one of which was key for the first step towards France losing Canada, the Spanish War of Succession in 1701. Charles II of Spain died with no children, and this led to a struggle for control of the Spanish Empire between his heirs, Philippe of Anjou and Charles of Austria. Philip was also in line for the French throne, I think, and thus was supported by France, perhaps predicting a possible union of the two empires. The British, of course, due to this and other reasons, supported Charles. A war broke out, Habsburg Spain, Austria, Great Britain, the Netherlands, Prussia, Portugal, and Savoy on one side, and Bourbon Spain, France, Bavaria, Cologne, and Portugal and Savoy, who changed sides after 1703, on the other. The war was a mess, and a bunch of things happened. Arguably, both sides won and lost, some more than others. In 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht brought peace, and Philip was recognized as King of Spain, but renounced his place in the French succession. And most importantly for this video, France had to cede significant parts of its territory in Canada to the British. They recognized British control over the Iroquois and ceded Nova Scotia and its claims to Newfoundland and territories in Rupert's Land. This was the first significant loss of territory by the French in North America, but more were to come, also at the hands of the British. Surprisingly, the post-war period seemed to boost New France's development, despite the fact they had lost territories. Industries such as fishing and farming expanded, a road called King's Highway was built between Montreal and Quebec to encourage faster trade, and the shipping industry also flourished as new ports were built and old ones upgraded. One really weird thing that happened was the usage of card money. I'm not sure if this is directly related to a growing economy and the lack of minting capabilities to keep up with it, but in the 17th and 18th centuries, playing cards were issued as currency by the colonial government of New France to make up for the low supply of minted coins. Official cards were embossed with a fleur-de-lis and the signatures of the intendant, the governor, and the treasurer. And they were so popular that even when supply for real money wasn't low, they kept being used, with an estimated 2 million livres, the French currency at the time, circulating in this form. In these images we can see examples of them. They look very easy to falsify, so I don't know how they worked. The population continued to grow, and by 1754, when France held its last North American survey, Canada was a self-sustaining colony with over 55,000 people across Quebec and Louisiana. But let's rewind a couple of decades here, because despite Louisiana being a part of the math for the post-1713 success, it wasn't a part of the growth itself. It's sort of that typical one chicken, two people situation. A statistic might tell you that if two people have one chicken together, each is getting half, but that might not be the case. Maybe one has 90% of the chicken and the other only 10%. It's the problem with GDP per capita numbers. It doesn't account for wealth distribution. In this case, it was the opposite, and all the growth of New France was due to the Canadian provinces. Louisiana, for whatever reason, kept losing money, and the only successful area seemed to be New Orleans due to its Mississippi River port. It was so bad that the French crown actually transferred control of the territory to a private banker called Antoine Crozat, a very wealthy advisor to the king, through a 15-year monopoly deal. But just 5 years in, he had lost 4 times his investment, and so he gave it up. After this, control of Louisiana and its very small population of only 700 colonists was given to the Mississippi Company, then renamed to Company of the Indies, who held a monopoly for the French crown. But the company also went bankrupt due to speculation in land development. It actually serves as one of the earliest examples in history of an economic bubble. Only 1 year later, in 1720, the king had Louisiana back in his hands, and the territory saw little to no development for the next 50 years. However, as if the War of Spanish Succession hadn't been enough, another major war took place with Britain and France on opposing sides, leading 2 alliances at war with each other. The 7 Years' War in Europe, which coincided with the French and Indian War in America, started as a small issue with Austria winning a province back, but then escalated to a global conflict between European powers who wanted colonial gains from each other. The British-led alliance won, and France's defeat was costly. This, along with the Louisiana management disaster, is the key moment of the French losing Canada and North America. One of the terms of the Peace Treaty of Paris in 1763 was that France would cede all its Canadian territory to Britain, as well as all lands east of the Mississippi, some to Britain and some to Spain. In addition, Louis XV saw little value in Louisiana, and to compensate Spain for its losses in the 7 Years' War, he transferred the territory to the Spanish king, who also happened to be his cousin, in 1762. At this point, all of Canada is now under British control, and the French Empire in North America was reduced to a couple islands in the Caribbean. So now it's 1764, and the French have no North American colonies, unless you consider some Caribbean islands as part of North America, except 2 small islands off the coast of Newfoundland, Pierre and Miquelon. We'll get to them in a second because New France wasn't done yet. You see, Louisiana remained under the control of Spain for a few decades, but then Napoleon rose to power and wanted to re-establish a French North American empire. So he demanded it back from Spain in 1800 in exchange for some territories in Tuscany. However, 2 factors led to them changing their mind. First, a revolution in Haiti, which the French held as a colony, was successful, humiliating the French and proving their colonial capability was gone. And second, the prospect of a new war against Britain meant that all expenses needed to be directed towards that. The now independent United States had shown interest in buying the port of New Orleans and made an offer for $10 million, with Napoleon then offering the whole Louisiana territory for only 15. In 1803, the purchase was concluded, and what was previously known as New France was completely gone from French hands, part of it now with the British and the rest with the United States. But what about those small islands I mentioned, Saint-Pierre and Miquelon? You see, technically New France still exists today. Initially being colonized by France, these islands were also lost to Britain in the 1713 peace treaty. However, in the 1763 one, the British granted them back to France, then retaking them in 1783 due to French support of the US in the Revolutionary War. But finally, in 1814, France definitively got them back, and they hold them until today as an overseas collectivity of the French Republic, the last remaining piece of what was once the Grand Territory of New France, and existing hand in hand with the other remnants of the old French Empire in the Caribbean, where the two overseas departments of Guadeloupe and Martinique exist, as well as the other two overseas collectivities of Saint Martin and Saint Barthélemy, plus of course French Guiana in South America. The modern remnants of European colonial empires would be a good video topic, but that is another story. So, that is a brief overview of how France lost North America in 2 different wars and 1 pretty bad trade deal. Learning how New France was established, how it expanded and grew, always facing issues with the British along the way. First establishing themselves in eastern Canada, but then expanding further into Iroquois territory and the rest of Quebec. Finally claiming Louisiana and attempting to colonize what is today the central third of the United States, but failing tremendously in various stages. Losing part of Canada as a consequence of the War of Spanish Succession in 1713, and then losing the rest of Canada in the 7 Years' War / French and Indian War of 1763, also being forced to cede to Spain the lands east of the Mississippi River along with Louisiana, with Napoleon attempting to re-establish New France through taking back Louisiana, but quickly realizing his mistake and selling it at a cheap price to the United States, culminating in the complete destruction of what was once the large colonial territory of the French in North America, save the very small islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, which despite also jumping around between France and Britain in all those peace treaties, ended up in the hands of the French, up to today being the only remnants of New France. Thanks so much for watching this video. Leave a comment with any corrections or additional information you might have, and subscribe if you want to catch future videos. I will see you next time for more general knowledge.